I made him visible before anyone knew his name. Of course, that is what I called it when his success started feeling like mine. 1 award, 2 cameras, 300 people waiting to clap for my husband. I thought the stage had finally made room for me. Then he took the microphone back and thanked me for proving his decision. My name is Serena Vale. I was 36, and I worked as a university advancement director. I made men with shy voices sound important to donors, and of course I believed that meant I understood how success was built. I made him visible, or at least that was the sentence I used when my husband's name started entering rooms before mine. The advancement office smelled like toner, old coffee, and the lemon spray our assistant used on the glass table before donor visits. I sat there on a Tuesday afternoon, editing remarks for a ceremony honouring individual brilliance. That phrase bothered me. Individual brilliance always had someone behind it, fixing the calendar, smoothing the shirt, finding the right room, teaching the brilliant person how to stand under lights. Adrian texted while I was changing one donor's sentence from generous to visionary. He said the National Science Committee had chosen him for an honour certificate for his research and new discoveries. He wrote it simply, as if he had told me the bus was late. 1 award, 2 sentences. No exclamation mark. I walked across campus to his research building after work. The hallway outside his lab smelled like disinfectant and warm metal. Adrian stood near the door with his sleeves rolled up, holding a folder against his chest. He looked tired and almost embarrassed by his own good news. Years earlier, before anyone knew his name, he practiced his first conference talk at our kitchen table until his voice cracked. I timed him with my phone. I told him where to pause, when to look up, how to stop apologizing before every result. He said I had saved him from disappearing into his own data. Back then, that private sentence had been enough. That afternoon, he touched my wrist and thanked me quietly. Quietly. Of course, I smiled. I said I was proud of him. I said the university would need a proper press angle. He asked softly, what changed between the first years and now, because once I cared about the work before I cared about the room. What he meant was that he missed the woman who listened to his science, even when she did not understand every word. What I heard was that he wanted me grateful in the corner. At home, Bianca called while Adrian warmed soup. She said genius men loved acting self-made after women made them possible. I looked at the ceremony email again. Bianca said I should make sure everyone knew who made him possible. The donor reception room had bad flowers and expensive lighting. That was common at the university. Someone always spent money on the thing people saw in photos and forgot the thing people smelled when they walked in. The white lilies near the entrance were already browning at the edges, and I told myself I would have fixed that if the ceremony team had asked me earlier. I made him visible. I had made many rooms visible too. Adrian arrived late from the lab, still wearing the same dark jacket he wore when he wanted to look professional but not impressive. I had bought that jacket. He never remembered that part unless I reminded him. Dr. Helen Graves walked beside him, her silver hair pinned low and her badge clipped straight. Helen had chaired Adrian's department for 8 years. She had the kind of calm that made people lower their voices around her. She respected data, patience, peer review, all the invisible things that did not photograph well. A donor named Leonard congratulated Adrian near the bar. He said the committee had been amazed by the clarity of Adrian's new findings. Adrian thanked him and began explaining the research in that careful way of his, as if people wanted the whole staircase when they had only asked to see the door. I stepped in before the donor's eyes drifted. I told Leonard that Adrian had needed years of training before he could explain anything without burying people alive in lab language. I said I had taken a brilliant man and taught him how not to vanish. People laughed. Leonard laughed first, then his wife. Adrian smiled for 2 seconds, because that was what my husband did when a room expected him to accept a joke. Then his smile left, without making a scene. 1 donor, 2 laughs, 3 seconds of Adrian looking at the floor. Of course I called it charm. Grant Bellamy came over after that. He worked with donor advisory projects and had the smooth patience of a man who knew where money sat before the room did. He said Adrian had the research, but I had the force that made people care. He said men like my husband were lucky when someone translated them into public value. That landed exactly where I wanted it. I told him Adrian was brilliant, but not built for attention. Grant said attention did not arrive by accident. Someone had to stage it. I liked the word stage because it made my hunger sound like work. Across the room, Oscar Penn watched me with his glass near his mouth. Oscar had been our friend since before the first grant, before the lab had better funding, before Adrian's name appeared on banners. He used to laugh when I joked that I was Adrian's unpaid publicity department. That night, he did not laugh as fast. Helen asked Adrian a question about the research trial, and I stepped closer. I could not help it. When Adrian spoke about methodology, the room narrowed around him. When I spoke about what his work meant, people looked relieved. I told Helen that no discovery reached the world without someone like me pushing the discoverer out of the basement. Helen's face did not change. She said Adrian's work had never been basement work. The line was polite enough to survive the room. It still touched me like a correction. After the reception, Adrian and I walked to the parking garage. The concrete smelled like rainwater and old exhaust. He carried the folder against his side. I carried the evening in my head, already editing it into something I could repeat to Bianca. He asked why I had told Leonard he would vanish without me. Specific. Factual. One named incident. That was how Adrian came to pain when he had tried silence for too long. He did not bring heat. He brought one sentence and asked me to look at it. I said I had saved the conversation. I said donors did not want a lecture about cell response pathways. I said he should be grateful that I knew how to make him human in public. He said he had felt like a research assistant in his own life. What he meant was that I had taken a congratulation from his hands while he was still holding it. What I heard was that he wanted me to clap and disappear. My mother's voice came into me then, sharp and old. Marlene had spent 30 years saying that wives became footnotes if they waited for men to credit them. My father had thanked hospitals, boards, mentors, and secretaries before he thanked her at his retirement dinner. She smiled that night. Later, she cried into a hand towel and said women like us had to take the microphone before men forgot who carried the first years. So I told Adrian he was being unfair. I told him private gratitude was easy because nobody could verify it. I told him he liked thanking me at home because it cost him nothing in front of people who mattered. He stopped walking beside the car. The garage light hummed above us. He said he had written my name in the first lab notebook he ever kept after we married. He said he still had it. He said there were whole pages where my help was the only reason he kept trying. I said notebooks did not applaud. That changed the air. At home, Grant sent a message saying he had enjoyed watching me manage the room. He said some women were built to be the reason powerful men became readable. I turned the phone face down when Adrian entered the kitchen. He saw it. Of course he saw it. He asked if Grant was messaging me about the reception. I told him Grant worked with donors and that professional follow-up did not need a confession. Adrian looked at the soup pot and turned off the burner. He had not eaten yet. Neither had I. The next morning, Bianca sent a voice note. She said Adrian sounded sensitive because he knew the award was partly mine. Then she said I should start using the phrase "my scientist" more often, because ownership frightened men who wanted free support. I laughed in my office. Oscar walked in during the laugh to drop off a donor packet. He asked if everything was all right after the reception. I said people were getting dramatic about a joke. He nodded but did not sit down, though he used to sit without asking. That was the first public ripple. By Friday, Helen was sending ceremony notes directly to Adrian instead of copying me. I told myself she was old-fashioned about academic hierarchy. Still, when I saw the email thread on his laptop, my hand stayed on the back of his chair longer than it needed to. Adrian looked up and asked if I needed something. I said no. I made him visible, But the ceremony planning was already moving without me. The faculty dinner was held in the West dining room, the one with tall windows and dark green curtains that made every academic look like they belonged in an oil painting. The room smelled like roasted garlic and too many wool coats drying on chairbacks. I had chosen my dress carefully because ceremonies begin before ceremonies. People decide where to place you long before the stage appears. Adrian sat beside Helen. I sat on his other side. That should have been enough. One table, 2 department chairs, 3 donors watching my husband like he had become a shared possession. Of course, I knew how to handle that kind of room. A colleague named Dr. Malik raised his glass and said Adrian's discovery had opened a new path for the department. He spoke warmly, directly, without looking at me. Adrian lowered his head the way he did when praise reached him too fast. I waited for him to turn, to place me inside the moment. He did not. So I did it. I told the table that Adrian had almost hidden his brilliance for years. I said he would still be a lab ghost if I had not taught him how to speak to people who did not live inside a microscope. I said some men needed a muse, a translator, and a wife with enough taste to keep them from becoming respected only by machines. People laughed because I made it light. That was my gift. I could wrap a blade in silk and call it dinner conversation. Oscar laughed once, then looked at Adrian's plate. Helen set her fork down. Adrian touched the stem of his water glass but did not drink. Dr. Malik said Adrian had always been respected in the lab. He said some work simply took time before the public understood it. I smiled at him. I said time was not strategy. Across the table, Oscar shifted in his chair. He had always enjoyed my sharpness when it made the room brighter. That night, he looked like he had brought a match to a house and only then smelled gas. After dinner, Adrian and I stood near the coat check. The hallway smelled like wet umbrellas. He had his hands in his coat pockets. He gave the quiet debrief. No raised voice. No dramatic injury. He said I no longer celebrated his work. I used it as a mirror. I told him that was a beautiful sentence and not an answer to anything real. He said every time someone congratulated him, I corrected the room until the praise belonged to me. What he meant was that I had turned his honor into a contest he had not entered. What I heard was that he wanted me grateful for being nearby. I said he liked me private because private women were easier to manage. He looked tired then, not angry, simply tired. That tiredness should have made me softer. Instead, I hated it because it made him look like the patient one. 2 coats. 1 claim ticket. No applause. At my mother's house 2 nights later, Marlene served tea in china cups she only used when she wanted advice to sound inherited. Her dining room smelled like cinnamon and old wood polish. She listened while I described the dinner, leaving out the parts where Helen went still. Marlene said I was right to protect my place. She said men loved private gratitude because private gratitude could be denied later. She told me my father had once thanked his entire department before the woman who ironed his first white coat. Bianca joined us by video from her apartment, sitting in bed with a glass of wine and the light from her phone making her face look younger. She said I was the woman behind the genius, and if Adrian did not know how to say it, maybe I had to say it for him. I said exactly. I said I made him visible. Bianca laughed, but the laugh arrived a little late. I noticed that delay and chose not to count it. Grant's messages became easier after that. He asked how the ceremony speech was coming along. He said the university would be foolish not to mention the human force behind Adrian's success. He also said he had to be careful because donor boards loved clean stories and hated domestic complexity. Agenda B, though I did not have that language then. Grant liked fire as long as he could stand outside the smoke. I told him clean stories were usually lies. He answered with a thumbs up and no more words until morning. The next day, I walked through Adrian's lab hallway carrying event programs. I did not need to be there. I told myself I was checking details. The lab smelled sharp and sterile with a faint plastic scent from sealed equipment. Helen stood with Adrian near a whiteboard covered in diagrams. I heard her ask him whether anyone else was reviewing his final speech. Adrian said no, he had it handled. Anyone else? Not Serena. The words sat there like a door closing. I stepped forward and said I could still polish it if needed. Helen looked at me, then at Adrian. She said the speech should sound like the person receiving the honour. Polite, clear, almost kind. That was worse than insult. Adrian did not invite me to read it. He folded the paper he was holding and placed it inside his notebook. On the way home, I told him Helen had become territorial. He said Helen was trying to keep the ceremony about the work. I said the work did not marry him, sit with him through failed grant calls, or teach him how to stop apologizing before sentences. He said he knew that. I asked if he knew it publicly. He did not answer fast enough. That pause became evidence. By the end of the week, Oscar stopped replying to my jokes in the group chat. Bianca still answered, but later. Marlene sent me a message saying not to stand in the shadows on the big night. Grant sent a link to a donor seating chart and said he hoped I would be placed where people could understand the full story. The full story. That was what I believed I was owed. Adrian began editing his ceremony speech alone in his study with the door half closed. I passed by twice, then a third time with laundry I did not need to carry. He turned the page face down when I entered. I smiled like it did not matter. Of course it did. Adrian's study always smelled like paper, dust, and the cedar blocks he kept in the bottom drawer because he said old books deserved better than moths. 3 nights before the ceremony, I went in looking for the program draft. That was the reason I gave myself. I was not snooping. I was making sure the event language did not embarrass us. 1 desk lamp, 2 stacks of papers, no speech in the printer tray. The shared printer beside the bookcase was empty. Adrian had stopped leaving drafts there. That was his new habit. Quiet control, dressed as organization. I opened the desk drawer because I knew he kept old conference folders inside. Under a stack of faded grant reviews sat a black lab notebook with the corners worn soft. His handwriting was on the cover. First trial year. I should have closed the drawer. Instead, I opened the notebook. Inside the front cover, in blue ink, Adrian had written a sentence from years ago. For Serena, who believed before the data did. The room did not move. The desk lamp buzzed. Outside the window, campus lights sat in small yellow squares across the dark lawn. For Serena. Not my wife. Not support. My name. I touched the ink with one finger, though it had been dry for years. A picture came back without asking. Our old kitchen table covered in printed slides. Adrian pacing in socks. Me timing him on my phone, cutting his apology lines, telling him to say the result first. He had looked at me then like I was not beside the work but inside his courage. For a short, quiet space, the sentence opened a door. He had given me credit before anyone asked. Not on stage. Not to donors. In the place where he kept failures, data, corrections, and all the little bruises of becoming good. Private gratitude was not nothing. It had been the language he trusted. Then the door closed because I closed it. Hidden gratitude did not count if the world never heard it. A notebook did not answer Marlene's warning. A sentence in blue ink did not stop Helen from placing me outside the speech. If he could write it there, he could say it under lights. Of course, private men always made privacy sound sacred when publicity cost them pride. Adrian came in while the notebook was still open in my hands. He did not grab it. He stood near the doorway and looked at the page. He asked why I had opened that drawer. I told him I was looking for the program draft. He said the program draft was in his briefcase. Then he looked at the notebook again and said he had meant what he wrote. What he meant was that there had been love in the place I was now searching for proof. What I heard was that he wanted old gratitude to pay a current debt. I said it was beautiful. Then I said nobody saw it. He said not everything real needed witnesses. That sentence sounded gentle. It also sounded like a lock. I told him that was easy for the man whose name was on the award. I told him wives were expected to be humble about sacrifices men later used as footnotes. He said I had stopped asking for thanks. I had started asking for ownership. There it was. The pattern, named without decoration. I said ownership was a strong word. He said so was muse when I used it like a title deed. His voice was low, his face looked open in a way I had not seen for weeks. Sad, but not strategic. Simply sad. He looked like a man standing beside a house he had built and finding the door painted over. I should have reached for him. Instead, I closed the notebook. The sound was small, but the room heard it. I changed tactics the next morning. Not remorse, strategy. I sent him a message from my office saying I wanted the ceremony night to be peaceful. I said I knew he deserved the honor. I said I only wanted him to remember the people who stood with him when the room clapped. It was soft enough to seem generous and sharp enough to leave a mark. He replied after 2 hours. He said he would thank people honestly. Honestly. I disliked that word from him. It suggested my version had become something else. Oscar did not answer when I sent him a joke about rehearsing my humble genius wife's smile. The message stayed unread until evening. Bianca answered my complaint with a short line saying maybe the night should stay simple. Simple was not a word she used when she was fully on my side. Marlene called and asked what I planned to wear. She said not to stand near the back. She said a woman who helped build a man should not let herself be photographed like furniture. Furniture. That word had lived in my family for years. My mother used it whenever she spoke about wives who disappeared into good manners. So I chose the ivory dress. At home, Adrian removed his ceremony speech from the shared printer tray. I saw him do it. One sheet. Clean fold. Briefcase pocket. Silent decision marker. He had stopped negotiating in shared spaces. I told myself he was being dramatic. I told myself he wanted to punish me by making the speech secret. I told myself that if he was so afraid of my edits, it was because he knew I would find what was missing. That night, Grant messaged about the donor seating again. He said he hoped my husband understood the optics of gratitude. Then, 3 minutes later, he added that I should be careful not to make anything too personal in front of the board. There it was. Permission with distance. I kept the first sentence and ignored the second. On the morning of the ceremony, Adrian put the old lab notebook into his briefcase with the speech. He saw me see it. I asked if he was bringing props now. He said no. He said he was bringing reminders. The study door closed after him. Something broke inside the walls, but it made no sound I could use against him. The National Science Honor Ceremony took place in a hotel ballroom with a crystal podium, white tablecloths, and blue lights washing the stage like the room wanted to look important, but not emotional. The air smelled like chilled flowers, and the sharp mineral scent of sparkling water poured into too many glasses at once. 300 people. One framed certificate. My husband's name printed in the program without mine beside it. Of course, I told myself I was calm. Marlene sat near the front in a navy suit, proud before anything had happened. Bianca was 3 rows behind her, looking down at her phone more than usual. Oscar sat near the aisle and did not wave when I entered. Helen stood near the stage with Adrian and 2 committee members, speaking to him like the night belonged to his work. Grant was near the donor section. He gave me a small nod, not warm enough to be quoted later. Adrian wore a dark suit I had chosen years earlier for his first invited lecture. He had the framed certificate waiting on a table beside the podium. His speech was folded inside his jacket pocket. I knew because he touched that pocket once while Helen spoke. The committee chair introduced him with careful words. She spoke about new discoveries, years of research, and the practical meaning of his findings. She said his work had changed the department's standing in the field. His work. Not our sacrifice. Not my years. Not the woman who made the man visible enough to stand there. My hands stayed folded in my lap. Then Adrian stepped to the stage. The applause rose around him, full and clean. People stood. Helen stood first. Oscar stood slowly. Marlene turned her face toward me, expecting me to smile the correct wife smile. The fear came old and fast. The room saw him. The room did not need me to understand him. The room did not ask who had taught him to lift his chin, how to use pauses, which jacket softened his shoulders. The room clapped like he had arrived there alone. 1 award, 2 cameras, 300 people stealing the story from me. I stood before I had a full sentence ready. At first, people assumed I was joining him. A proud wife moment. A photo moment. Something harmless. That made it easier to reach the stage. Adrian turned when he saw me coming. His face changed by a small degree. He knew. Not the details, maybe, but the direction. I stepped beside him and reached for the framed certificate. He held it for 1 second longer than I expected. Then I took it. The frame was heavier than it looked. My fingers pressed against the cool edge. I touched his arm and moved him slightly aside. Not hard. Enough. The microphone stood between us on its crystal podium. I took it before the committee chair could move. I told the room that before everyone gave all the applause to one man, they should know the fuller story. I said Adrian was brilliant, yes, but brilliance without shape was just noise in a lab. I said I had shaped him. I had trained him to speak, dressed him for rooms, pushed him through doubt, corrected his presentations, carried the social weight he never even saw. A few people laughed at first. That laugh fed me. I said every height he reached had my fingerprints on it. I said if he had not been with me, he would have been a loser in life, a gifted man hiding behind equipment and awkward pauses. I said I was his muse, his inspiration, and the reason the committee even knew how to understand him. The room changed. I heard it in the space between breaths. Applause does not die all at once. It thins. It becomes chairs creaking and glass touching tablecloth. Helen stood still near the stage steps. Oscar looked down. Bianca's phone was in her hand, but she was not filming. Marlene's face was bright for the first half of my speech and tight for the second. I should have stopped there. I did not. The wound was open, and the room was finally large enough to pour it into. I told Adrian that his place was not at the microphone pretending he had built himself. I told him his place, at least for the next minute, was to bring me a drink while the room gave the right person some credit. No one laughed. Adrian looked at me. His face did not collapse. That annoyed me. A broken man would have made the room choose quickly. He only looked tired, the same tired from the coat check, the study, the kitchen table, all of it gathered in one quiet face. He stepped away from the podium. A server near the side table held a tray of sparkling water. Adrian took 1 glass, walked back to the stage, and handed it to me. I did not take it. He brought it to his own mouth instead. He drank slowly, just enough to wet his throat. The glass caught the stage light. 1 clear sip. 1 folded speech. No tremor in his hand. Then he asked for the microphone. His voice was calm enough that refusing would have made me look worse. I gave it back. He thanked the committee. He thanked Helen. He thanked his lab by name. He thanked the junior researchers who had spent weekends checking data no donor would ever see. Then he thanked me. The room seemed to lean forward but not toward me, toward the danger of what his thanks might contain. He said I had once believed in him before the data did. He said that was a sentence he had written years ago, and it had been true when he wrote it. He said there had been a time when my support helped him stand in rooms he feared. For a second, I almost stepped closer. Then he kept reading. He said support had become ownership. He said private love had become public correction. He said tonight had made plain what he had been unable to explain in smaller rooms. He said he would not argue on the stage, and he would not ask 300 people to judge the marriage. He said after this night, the matter would move into hands trained for formal endings because he was done letting public charm hide private disrespect. No legal document, no named office. Still, everyone understood the road under the words. He looked at the audience, not at me. and said he had prepared this speech hoping he would not need the last page. Then he read the last page anyway. He said he had organized records of public incidents, messages, and witness statements because words had stopped working at home. He said the people who needed to receive them would receive them. I stood beside him holding nothing. The certificate was back in his hand. I did not remember giving it back. Maybe Helen had taken it. Maybe Adrian had. The frame was no longer against my fingers. I reached for my phone and texted Bianca that he was humiliating me. The message showed delivered, then read, no answer. When I looked toward her row, Bianca was already walking toward the ballroom exit. Adrian finished the speech by thanking the committee again. People clapped, but not like before. It was careful applause. Applause with distance. Grant did not look at me as he left the donor section. Marlene stayed seated, her hands pressed together, eyes fixed on the stage carpet. Helen stepped up beside Adrian and placed one hand near his back without touching him. That was the whole room choosing a side without making a speech. The attorney's conference room on Monday morning smelled like fresh paper and cold coffee. The ceremony footage was paused on a laptop at the end of the table. In the still image, my hand was on the certificate frame and Adrian's shoulder was turned slightly away from me. One laptop, 2 folders, my name on the top page. Adrian sat beside Helen, not beside me. A legal assistant placed a packet in front of me and asked me to review the cover page. Her voice was plain, not cruel, not kind enough to fight. The document was titled Petition for Dissolution of Marriage and Temporary Financial Orders. The first filing date was listed for that week. A temporary hearing had already been requested. I touched the corner of the page, then moved my hand to my lap because my thumbnail had left a mark in the paper. Of course, the first thing I wanted to fix was the paper. The packet included stills from the ceremony video, audio notes from the event team, photos from earlier donor receptions, and messages to Bianca, where I had written that Adrian's success was basically mine wearing his name. Grant's messages were there too, the careful ones, the ones where he praised my force and protected his own distance in the same breath. Helen's witness statement sat behind the ceremony transcript. I said I had only asked for credit. The attorney said the issue before them was public humiliation, documented marital misconduct, financial separation, and the next procedural step. She did not raise her voice. That was what made the sentence stay. Grant emailed before I left the building. He said he could not be associated with my personal situation and had removed me from the donor advisory project. By the time I opened the project portal, my access was gone. I moved from the townhouse into a corporate rental near campus with rented art above the sofa. The joint accounts were restricted while the temporary orders were reviewed. Bianca stopped answering. Oscar blocked me. Marlene said nothing publicly, and Helen stood with Adrian. Grant removed me from the donor advisory project and deleted our message thread from his visible devices. The university took me off the annual Science Gala remarks and assigned them to someone who had once asked me how to write applause into silence. I believed I was the reason Adrian became visible. I believed the room had stolen my share because nobody understood what wives carried before the lights came on. Of course, I thought taking the microphone would correct the story. It corrected it, just not in my favor. The framed honor certificate appeared in the packet as Exhibit C, still in Adrian's hands before I grabbed it. I wanted my name attached to his greatest achievement, and it stayed attached as evidence.